It was a quiet night, the kind of silence that felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. The father stood at the edge of his daughter's room, his face shadowed by the dim light of the hallway. He knelt beside her bed, his voice low and steady. "You have to be brave tonight," he said, his words barely above a whisper. "No matter what happens, don't be afraid." The daughter, no older than 6, nodded slowly, her wide eyes filled with trust. She clutched her stuffed bear tightly, unaware of the gravity of her father's words. He kissed her forehead, his lips cold against her skin, and left the room, closing the door behind him. The room plunged into darkness, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Hours passed, and the house remained still. The mother, exhausted from the day, was asleep in the next room. But then, a sound broke the silence, a faint, trembling cry. It was the daughter, her voice trembling with fear. The mother stirred, her heart racing as she sat up in bed. She rushed to her daughter's room, her mind filled with worry. When she opened the door, the scene before her made her blood run cold. Her daughter was sitting upright in bed, tears streaming down her face. But it wasn't the tears that shocked her, it was the glowing object in her small hands. It pulsed with a soft, otherworldly light, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "Mommy," the daughter whispered, her voice trembling. "Dad said they're coming for me." The mother froze, her mind racing. She reached out to take the object, but her daughter pulled it closer, her tiny hands gripping it tightly. "No," she said, her voice firm, despite her tears. "Dad said I have to keep it safe." The mother's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't understand what was happening, but one thing was clear, her husband had left their daughter in the dark for a reason, and whatever it was far bigger than she could imagine. The mother sat on the edge of her daughter's bed, her mind spinning with questions. She gently stroked her daughter's hair, trying to calm her down. The glowing object in the child's hands was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was smooth, like glass, but warm to the touch, and the light it emitted seemed to pulse in rhythm with the girl's breathing. "What did Dad say, sweetheart?" the mother asked softly, her voice trembling. The daughter sniffled, her small fingers tracing the surface of the object. He said I have to keep this safe. He said bad people are coming, and they want to take it away." The mother's heart sank. She had always trusted her husband, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. She kissed her daughter's forehead and tucked her back into bed, promising to stay with her until she fell asleep. Once the child was asleep, the mother carefully took the glowing object and placed it on the nightstand. She left the room, her mind racing. She needed answers, and she needed them now. She found her husband in the basement, hunched over a cluttered workbench. The room was filled with strange tools, blueprints, and sheets of paper covered in symbols she didn't recognize. He didn't hear her come in, too focused on whatever he was working on. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice sharp with fear and frustration. He jumped, startled, and turned to face her. His face was pale, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and desperation. "You shouldn't be down here," he said, his voice strained. "Our daughter is upstairs, holding some kind of glowing thing, and you're telling me I shouldn't be down here," she snapped. "What is happening? What have you gotten us into?" He hesitated, his hands trembling as he set down the tool he was holding. "I can't explain everything right now," he said, his voice low. "But you have to trust me. What I'm doing, it's for her. For all of us." The mother shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Trust you? You left her alone in the dark with that thing. She's terrified, and so am I. You owe me an explanation." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "There are things you don't understand," he said. "Things I can't tell you." "Not yet." "Then when?" she cried. "When will you tell me?" "When it's too late." He didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to his workbench, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The mother stared at him, her heart breaking. She had never felt so alone, so lost. The next morning, she woke up to find him gone. His side of the bed was cold, and his car was missing from the driveway. On the kitchen table, she found a note, written in his messy handwriting. Protect her at all costs. They're closer than you think. The mother crumpled the note in her hand, her fear turning to anger. She didn't know who they were, but she was determined to find out. She went to her daughter's room, where the child was still asleep, the glowing object clutched tightly in her hands. As she watched her daughter sleep, the mother made a silent promise. No matter what it took, she would protect her child. Even if it meant facing the unknown. The days that followed were filled with tension and unease. The mother kept a close eye on her daughter, who seemed oddly calm, despite the strange events. The glowing object never left the child's side. She carried it everywhere, to the breakfast table, to the backyard, even to the bathroom. It was as if the object had become a part of her, a source of comfort in the midst of the chaos. The mother tried to distract herself with household chores, but her mind kept drifting back to the note her husband had left. They're closer than you think. Who were they? And what did they want with her daughter? One afternoon, while her daughter was playing in the living room, the mother decided to take a closer look at the glowing object. She knelt beside the child and gently asked, "Can I see it for a moment, sweetheart?" The daughter hesitated, her small fingers tightening around the object. But after a moment, she nodded and handed it to her mother. The moment the mother touched it, a strange sensation washed over her. It was warm, almost alive, and she felt a faint hum, like a quiet vibration, coursing through her hands. She turned it over, examining it closely. The surface was smooth and flawless, with no seams or markings. It seemed to glow brighter as she held it, as if responding to her touch. The mother spent the next few days in a state of constant vigilance. She barely slept, her mind consumed by the strange symbols her daughter had drawn and the glowing object that never left the child's side. She tried to piece together the fragments of information she had, but nothing made sense. Who were they? And why were they coming for her daughter? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, there was a knock at the door. The mother froze, her heart pounding. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the thought of strangers at her doorstep filled her with dread. She peered through the peephole and saw a man standing outside. He was tall, with sharp features and piercing eyes that seemed to look right through her. He wore a long coat, and his expression was serious, almost grim. The mother hesitated, her hand hovering over the lock. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice trembling. "I'm a friend," the man replied, his voice calm but urgent. "I need to speak with you. It's about your husband." The mention of her husband made her heart race. She unlocked the door and opened it just enough to see the man clearly. "What do you know about my husband?" she demanded. The man glanced over his shoulder, as if checking to see if anyone was watching. "May I come in?" he asked. "It's not safe to talk out here." The mother hesitated, but her desperation for answers outweighed her fear. She stepped aside and let the man in, quickly closing the door behind him. The stranger looked around the room, his eyes lingering on the glowing object that sat on the coffee table. The daughter was in the kitchen, coloring quietly, unaware of the visitor. "You have it," the man said, his voice low. "The key." The mother's eyes widened. "What are you talking about? What key?" The man turned to her, his expression grave. "The object your daughter is holding, it's not just a trinket. It's a key to something far greater. And there are people who will stop at nothing to get it." The mother felt a chill run down her spine. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaking. "My name doesn't matter," the man replied. "What matters is that you listen to me. Your husband was part of a secret organization. They made contact with something. Something not of this world. That object is a device, a tool that can open a portal to another dimension. And your daughter, she's the only one who can use it." The mother's mind reeled. She wanted to laugh, to dismiss the man's words as madness, but deep down, she knew he was telling the truth. The glowing object, the symbols, her husband's sudden disappearance, it all fit together in a way that was too strange to ignore. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because they're coming," the man said, his eyes filled with urgency. "And when they do, they won't stop until they have what they want. You need to leave. Now. Take your daughter and go somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't find you." The mother's heart pounded in her chest. "Where can we go? If what you're saying is true, there's no place safe." The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small piece of paper. On it was an address, written in neat handwriting. "Go here," he said. "It's a safe house. You'll be protected there. But you need to leave tonight." The mother took the paper, her hands trembling. She looked at the man, her eyes filled with fear and desperation. "Who are you really? And why are you helping us?" The man's expression softened, just for a moment. "Let's just say I owe your husband a debt," he said. "And I don't want to see his family pay the price for his mistakes." Before she could say anything else, the man turned and walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the knob, and looked back at her. "Don't trust anyone," he said. "Not even the people you think you know." And with that, he was gone, leaving the mother standing in the middle of the room, her mind racing and her heart filled with fear. The mother didn't waste any time. The stranger's warning echoed in her mind, and the urgency in his voice left no room for doubt. She packed a small bag with essentials, clothes, food, water, and, of course, the glowing object that her daughter refused to let go of. "We're going on a little trip, sweetheart," she said, trying to keep her voice calm as she helped her daughter put on her shoes. The child looked up at her, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Where are we going, Mommy?" "Somewhere safe," the mother replied, forcing a smile. "Just you and me, okay?" The daughter nodded, clutching the glowing object tightly. The mother's heart ached at the sight. Her child was so innocent, so unaware of the danger that was closing in around them. They left the house under the cover of darkness, the mother scanning the streets nervously as she loaded her daughter into the car. The address the stranger had given her was a few hours away, in a remote area, surrounded by dense woods. She hoped it would be far enough to keep them safe, at least for a while. As they drove, the mother kept glancing in the rearview mirror, her anxiety growing with every mile. The roads were empty, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. About an hour into the drive, her fears were confirmed. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, growing steadily closer. At first, she told herself it was just another car, but something about the way it moved, too fast, too deliberate, made her uneasy. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel and pressed down on the accelerator, trying to put some distance between them and the car behind them. But the headlights only grew brighter, closer. "Mommy, what's wrong?" her daughter asked, sensing her mother's tension. "Nothing, sweetheart," the mother replied, her voice strained. "Just sit tight, okay?" The car behind them sped up, closing the gap. The mother's heart raced as she swerved onto a side road, hoping to lose their pursuer. But the other car followed, its headlights glaring in her rearview mirror. Panic set in as she realized they were being chased. She didn't know who was in the car or what they wanted, but she had no doubt they were after her daughter, and the glowing object. The road twisted and turned, the trees closing in around them. The mother's hands were slick with sweat as she navigated the sharp curves, her mind racing. She had to find a way to lose them, but the car behind her was relentless. Suddenly, the road ahead was blocked by a fallen tree. The mother slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop just inches from the obstacle. She glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the other car pulling up behind them, its engine idling ominously. "Stay here," she told her daughter, her voice firm. "Don't move, no matter what." The mother stepped out of the car, her legs trembling as she faced the vehicle behind them. The doors opened, and two figures emerged, their faces obscured by the shadows. "Give us the child," one of them said, his voice cold and emotionless. The mother's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground. "You're not taking her," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. The figures stepped closer, their movements slow and deliberate. The mother glanced back at the car, where her daughter was watching with wide, frightened eyes. She knew she had to protect her, no matter what. Just as the figures reached for her, a loud roar filled the air. The mother turned to see a truck barreling down the road, its headlights blinding. The figures hesitated, and in that moment, the mother saw her chance. She grabbed her daughter from the car and ran into the woods, the glowing object clutched tightly in the child's hands. The trees closed in around them, their branches scratching at her arms and face as she pushed forward. Behind her, she could hear the sound of footsteps, the voices of their pursuers growing louder. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. The mother ran until her legs felt like they would give out, her daughter's small hand gripping hers tightly. Finally, she spotted a small cabin in the distance, its windows dark and silent. "We're almost there, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice filled with determination. "Just a little further." They reached the cabin, and the mother quickly unlocked the door and pulled her daughter inside. She locked the door behind them, her heart pounding as she listened for any sign of their pursuers. For now, they were safe. But the mother knew the chase was far from over. The cabin was small and dimly lit, with a musty smell that suggested it hadn't been used in a long time. The mother quickly checked the windows and doors, making sure they were secure. Her daughter sat on the floor, still clutching the glowing object, her eyes wide with fear. "It's okay, sweetheart," the mother said, kneeling beside her. "We're safe here." But even as she said the words, she wasn't sure she believed them. The events of the night had left her shaken, and the thought of their pursuers finding them filled her with dread. She rummaged through the cabin, looking for anything that might help them. In a dusty drawer, she found an old flashlight and a map of the area. She also discovered a small notebook tucked under a pile of blankets. Curious, she opened it and began to read. The notebook belonged to her husband. His handwriting filled the pages, detailing his work with a secret organization. The entries were filled with technical jargon and sketches of strange devices, but one passage stood out. "The device is more than a key, it's a bridge. A connection to another world. But it's also a weapon, one that could destroy everything if it falls into the wrong hands. I've made a terrible mistake, and now my family is in danger. I have to protect them, no matter the cost." The mother's hands trembled as she read the words. Her husband had been involved in something far bigger than she had ever imagined. And now, his secrets had put their daughter in danger. She flipped through the notebook, her eyes scanning the pages for any clue that might help them. One sketch caught her attention, a symbol that matched the ones her daughter had drawn. Beneath it, her husband had written, "The portal can only be activated by someone with a unique genetic marker. My daughter is the key." The mother's heart sank. Her daughter wasn't just a bystander in all of this, she was the center of it. The glowing object, the symbols, the pursuers, it all revolved around her. She closed the notebook and sat down beside her daughter, her mind racing. She didn't know what to do, but she knew she couldn't let anyone take her child. "Mommy," the daughter said softly, breaking the silence. "I'm scared." The mother pulled her close, holding her tightly. "I know, sweetheart. But I'm here, and I'm not going to let anything happen to you." The daughter looked up at her, her eyes filled with trust. "Dad said I have to be brave," she said. "But I don't know how." The mother's heart ached at the words. She kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "You're the bravest girl I know. And together, we'll figure this out." As the night wore on, the mother kept watch, her ears straining for any sound outside. The cabin was quiet, but she couldn't shake the feeling that danger was still close. Just before dawn, she heard a faint noise outside, a rustling in the bushes. She grabbed the flashlight and crept to the window, her heart pounding. Through the glass, she saw a figure moving in the shadows. It was the stranger who had warned her, his face pale and drawn. "Let me in," he said, his voice urgent. "They're coming." The mother hesitated, her mind racing. She didn't know if she could trust him, but she also knew they couldn't face this alone. She unlocked the door and let him in, her eyes scanning the darkness behind him. What's happening? She demanded. The stranger's expression was grim. They've tracked you here, he said. You need to leave. Now. The mother's heart sank. Where can we go? The stranger glanced at the glowing object in the daughter's hands. There's a place, he said. A place where the portal can be activated. It's the only way to keep her safe. The mother's mind raced. She didn't know if she could trust the stranger, but she also knew they were running out of options. What happens if we activate the portal? She asked, her voice trembling. The stranger's eyes met hers, filled with a mix of fear and determination. It's a risk, he said. But it's the only way to protect her. And maybe, just maybe, it's the only way to bring your husband back. The mother looked at her daughter, who was watching them with wide, innocent eyes. She knew the decision she made next would change their lives forever. The mother's heart raced as she processed the stranger's words. Activating the portal was a risk, but what other choice did they have? The pursuers were closing in, and staying in the cabin would only buy them a little more time. She looked at her daughter, who was still clutching the glowing object, her small face filled with trust and innocence. Where is this place? The mother asked, her voice steady, despite the fear coursing through her. The stranger pulled out a folded map from his coat and spread it on the table. He pointed to a spot deep in the woods, marked with the same symbol her daughter had drawn. It's here, he said. An old facility, hidden away. Your husband helped build it. It's the only place where the portal can be activated. The mother studied the map, her mind racing. The journey would be dangerous, especially with their pursuers so close. But if there was even a chance to protect her daughter and bring her husband back, she had to take it. We'll go, she said firmly, looking up at the stranger. But if you're lying to us, if this is some kind of trap. It's not, the stranger interrupted, his voice filled with urgency. I'm risking my life to help you. But we need to move now. The mother nodded, her resolve hardening. She packed their few belongings and took her daughter's hand. The child looked up at her, her eyes wide but trusting. We're going on an adventure, sweetheart, the mother said, forcing a smile. Just like Dad used to talk about. The daughter nodded, clutching the glowing object tightly. Will Dad be there? She asked. The mother's heart ached at the question. I hope so, she said softly. They left the cabin under the cover of dawn, the forest quiet and still. The stranger led the way, his movements quick and deliberate. The mother followed closely, her daughter's small hand gripping hers. As they walked, the mother couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The trees seemed to close in around them, their shadows stretching long and dark. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made her heart skip a beat. After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing. In the center stood a large, rusted metal door embedded in the side of a hill. The stranger approached it and began to enter a code into a keypad beside the door. This is it, he said, his voice low. The facility. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel. The mother hesitated, her instinct screaming at her to turn back. But the stranger stepped inside, and she knew there was no other choice. They followed him down the tunnel, the air growing colder with every step. The walls were lined with strange symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light. The daughter reached out to touch one, her fingers tracing the lines. It's like my drawings, she whispered. The mother's heart ached at the words. She didn't know what any of this meant, but she knew her daughter was at the center of it. At the end of the tunnel, they entered a large, circular room. In the center was a massive machine, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols. The mother's breath caught in her throat as she realized what it was, the portal. The stranger approached the machine and began to adjust the controls. We need to activate it, he said. But once we do, there's no turning back. The mother looked at her daughter, who was staring at the machine with wide eyes. What happens if we activate it? She asked. The stranger hesitated. It will open a doorway to another world, he said. A world where your daughter will be safe. But it will also draw attention. The people chasing us will know where we are. The mother's mind raced. She didn't know if she could trust the stranger, but she also knew they were out of options. Do it, she said, her voice firm. The stranger nodded and began to enter a sequence into the machine. The symbols on its surface began to glow brighter, and the air in the room grew heavy with energy. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to shake. The mother grabbed her daughter, holding her tightly as the machine roared to life. A beam of light shot from its center, illuminating the room with a blinding glow. The portal was opening. The room trembled as the machine roared to life, the beam of light growing brighter and more intense. The air crackled with energy, and the symbols on the walls glowed with an otherworldly brilliance. The mother held her daughter tightly, shielding her from the blinding light. It's working, the stranger said, his voice filled with awe and fear. The portal is opening. The mother's heart pounded as she watched the light swirl and twist, forming a shimmering doorway in the center of the room. Beyond it, she could see glimpses of another world, vast, alien landscapes filled with colors and shapes she couldn't comprehend. What do we do now? She asked, her voice trembling. The stranger turned to her, his expression grave. You need to take her through, he said. It's the only way to keep her safe. The mother hesitated, her mind racing. What about you? I'll stay behind, he said. I'll hold them off as long as I can. The mother's heart ached at the thought. She didn't know this man, but he had risked everything to help them. You don't have to do this, she said. The stranger shook his head. This is bigger than any of us, he said. Your daughter is the key. She's the only one who can stop what's coming. Before the mother could respond, a loud crash echoed through the facility. The sound of footsteps and voices filled the air, growing louder with every second. They're here, the stranger said, his voice urgent. Go. Now. The mother looked at her daughter, who was staring at the portal with wide, curious eyes. Are you ready, sweetheart? She asked, her voice soft. The daughter nodded, clutching the glowing object tightly. Will Dad be there? She asked. The mother's heart ached at the question. I don't know, she said honestly. But we'll find out together. She took her daughter's hand and stepped toward the portal, the light washing over them like a wave. The air around them felt alive, humming with energy. Just as they reached the threshold, the door to the room burst open. A group of armed figures stormed in, their faces hidden behind masks. The stranger turned to face them, his expression filled with determination. Go, he shouted, his voice echoing through the room. The mother hesitated for a moment, her heart breaking at the sight. But she knew she had to protect her daughter. She took a deep breath and stepped through the portal, pulling her daughter with her. The world around them shifted, the light and sound swirling together in a dizzying blur. For a moment, the mother felt weightless, as if she were floating in a sea of stars. Then, with a sudden jolt, they landed on solid ground. The mother opened her eyes and gasped. They were standing in a vast, alien landscape, the sky filled with swirling colors and strange, glowing orbs. The air was thick with the scent of something sweet and unfamiliar. Her daughter looked around, her eyes wide with wonder. It's beautiful, she whispered. The mother's heart ached as she realized they were alone in this strange new world. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain, she would do whatever it took to keep her daughter safe. The mother and daughter stood in the alien landscape, the air around them humming with an otherworldly energy. The glowing object in the child's hands pulsed softly, as if in harmony with the strange world they had entered. The mother looked around, her heart filled with a mix of awe and fear. Where are we, Mommy? The daughter asked, her voice filled with wonder. I don't know, sweetheart, the mother replied, her voice soft. But we're together, and that's what matters. As they explored the landscape, they noticed that the symbols on the glowing object seemed to match the patterns in the environment, the swirling colors in the sky, the glowing orbs, and even the strange plants that dotted the ground. It was as if the object was a key to understanding this world. The mother's mind raced as she tried to make sense of it all. She thought about her husband, the stranger, and the sacrifices they had made to protect her daughter. She didn't know if she would ever see them again, but she knew their actions had given her and her daughter a chance to start over, to find safety in this strange new place. As they walked, the daughter suddenly stopped and pointed ahead. "Look, Mommy." The mother followed her gaze and saw a figure standing in the distance. Her heart leaped as she recognized the silhouette. It was her husband. "Dad," the daughter cried, running toward him. The mother's eyes filled with tears as she followed, her heart pounding with hope and disbelief. When they reached him, she saw that he looked tired but unharmed. He knelt down and embraced their daughter, his eyes filled with love and relief. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I never wanted to put you in danger." The mother stood there, her heart aching with a mix of anger and relief. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice trembling. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with regret. "I wanted to protect you," he said. "But I see now that I should have trusted you. I should have told you everything." The mother knelt beside him, her tears streaming down her face. "We're a family," she said. "We're supposed to face things together." He nodded, pulling her into the embrace. For the first time in what felt like forever, they were together again, a family reunited in a world that was both strange and beautiful. As they sat there, the daughter held up the glowing object. "Look, Dad," she said. "It's working." The object began to pulse brighter, and the symbols on its surface glowed with a radiant light. The air around them seemed to vibrate, and the landscape shifted, revealing a path that led to a shimmering, golden city in the distance. "What is that?" the mother asked, her voice filled with awe. "It's a new beginning," her husband replied, his voice filled with hope. "A place where we can be safe. A place where we can start over." The family stood together, their hands intertwined, and began to walk toward the city. As they did, the mother felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. They had been through so much, loss, fear, and danger, but they had also found strength, love, and hope. When they reached the city, they were greeted by beings unlike anything they had ever seen. They were tall and luminous, their forms shifting and glowing like the symbols on the object. But despite their alien appearance, their presence felt warm and welcoming. One of the beings stepped forward and spoke, their voice echoing in the mother's mind. "You have come a long way," they said. "And you have brought the key." The daughter held up the glowing object, and the being nodded. "This is a bridge between our worlds," they said. "A symbol of unity and hope. You are safe here, and you are welcome." The mother looked at her husband and daughter, her heart filled with gratitude. They had found a new home, a place where they could heal and grow. As they settled into their new life, the mother realized that the journey had taught her something important, that love and family were the greatest strengths of all. No matter how dark the night, no matter how far they had to go, they would always find their way as long as they were together. And so, in this strange and beautiful world, they began a new chapter, a chapter filled with hope, love, and the promise of a brighter future. The end.